Saddam Hussein in particular, we know that he had weapons because we have the receipts from him. So I asked this guy at the Pentagon, I said, do you think we have a responsibility to start disarming the world by like stopping the arms trade? I mean, this is what the Iran-Contra scandal was about. This is like, there's never, again, like the wisdom of Jesus. If you pick up the sword, you'll die by the sword. I mean, can we not learn that, you know? So I think that's one of the things I would really challenge is what is going to create a safer world? And can we immediately just say to these companies like Lockheed Martin, like, it's time that this stop, you know? And I would really say that we, to bring this issue of poverty and homelessness, the fact that the average age of a homeless person in the United States is 9 is a terrible failure of our society, you know. And so I would really want to bring that up, you know, and say like, let's think through that, because Obama and McCain have said a lot about the middle class, but the fact is that we haven't heard about the poor much, you know, and our gospel says, blessed are the poor, not blessed are the middle class, you know, and that's the gospel that we believe in. The most marginalized is those that we need to be giving special attention to. And in light of that too, I mean, there's so many things I would love to talk about, and maybe we'll have a chance to. I have written a letter to him, and I think that the prison buildup that we have, you know, 2 million people in prison, is a terrible failure right now, and that they're being used for work. You know this, right? Like that prisoners are hired out to work for companies like McDonald's and Eddie Bauer, and they don't have to pay any minimum wage, you know, like the 13th Amendment that was to abolish slavery says slavery or involuntary servitude is illegal unless the person's convicted of a crime. And so in Philadelphia, they asked Philly, how are you preparing for the welfare cuts? And Philadelphia said, we're building 5 new prisons. It's a way that we've come to deal with poverty and with homelessness. And certainly many of the people there have done things wrong. But many of those are crimes of economics. They're being involved in the drug trafficking. They're stealing things like that. And so it's indicative that, you know, over 50% of the people in prison are there because of non-violent crimes, but actually crimes having economic dimensions.
And the percentage of African Americans in prison systems are pretty.
Yeah, the last I heard, it's around 1 in every 6 African American men is in prison or under judicial constraint at some point in their life, and that should break all of our hearts, you know. And I think it should and probably does break Obama's heart, you know. Yeah. So that's 2 minutes worth. Okay. So yeah, I need an hour with him.
I want to change the trajectory just a little bit, and what do you mean by fresh imagination? Can you just put a little more flesh to that? What is fresh imagination? And I think part of the reason why that has spoken to me, again, is because I think Christians in particular, we tend to either critique culture or we tend to imitate culture. And when we do imitate culture, it usually doesn't turn out too well. So what do you mean by fresh imagination? How can we be encouraged here today by thinking in fresh ways?
Yeah, well, I mean, that scripture that constantly comes in my head is Romans, where it says, let us not conform to the patterns of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of our mind. You know, by having that kind of creativity with how we live. And what's beautiful, I think, is so much of it's in Scripture already. You know, I mean, if you read back even in the Hebrew Scriptures, surely there's some stuff there that gets a little boring, you know, in Numbers and stuff. But there's stuff that's like these laws that were put into place for the Israelites. Like some of them are so brilliant, you know, that there's this sense of like real order and structure to how you're to live. And every 7 years you're to let the land rest, and every 50 years there's to be a jubilee where debt is dismantled, you know, and property is redistributed, and slaves are set free, and it's to say, like, if you don't do these things, you're going to end up like Egypt again. You're going to end up slaves like the world where you came from. And I mean, like, my gosh, if that doesn't have fresh wisdom for Wall Street, I don't know what does. I mean, if we can look at Wall Street and see the patterns where right now the average worker is making $7.50 an hour the average worker, the average CEO is making over $1,500 an hour. And it's those patterns that have created the fragileness of Wall Street, you know, to where people are seeing, like, this is not sustainable. When 3 people own the same amount as 50 countries' economies, like, that's a fragile world, you know? And if we don't school ourselves in things like Jubilee's going to school us, you know? Like, it's going to, those fragile systems are not sustainable. And they're going to be attacked. You know, what was attacked on September 11th? Was not just random buildings, but the symbols of economy and the arms that would protect it. And by no means justify the horrible thing that was done, but it should shout out to all of us, like, does God's dream look like America's? Does it look like Wall Street? Does God have a different dream? And how can we live into that? And I think there's so many examples of what that can look like, of communities like the ones I shared tonight, but also of individuals that I've got folks in our community that are like just doing such creative things. One of my buddies is a scientist, and it's fantastic. He like studies things I can't even pronounce, but he began to study bacteria in the water because he was so disturbed that the largest cause of suffering and death in our world is lack of access to clean water, you know? And as a scientist, he's like, man, this is something we can solve. Like, we can figure that out. And so they started studying bacteria, started studying technology that can change that. And now they have a group of business people, kind of missional Christian business people, that saw that we spend enough money in industrialized countries on bottled water that if we just reallocated that money, we could provide water access for the rest of the world. And so they started a bottled water company now that bottles basically tap water, and they sell it everywhere. And every dollar that they make in profits goes to dig wells overseas with groups like Mennonite Central Committee that are using indigenous labor to dig the wells. And every bottle of water, on the bottle it says, "When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink." You know, so those are the examples of faith-based imagination and missional living. Another kid I met the other day is a robotics engineer, which is, I'm like, that's awesome. You know, he makes robots. And he's like, yeah, he's like, it is cool. He's like, but you know, for a long time I was just doing it because it was going to make cash. And he said, but I started to think, why has God given me these gifts? And he said, now I'm a different kind of robotics engineer. And he said, we're designing robots that can dismantle landmines. And he said, and we're sending them over to Afghanistan so that they can do the job that little kids are getting their fingers blown off doing. And so that they can disarm fields so kids can play again. You know, and that's exactly the sort of thing I see, and there's so many young people here tonight that are going, the real question is not just, am I going to be a doctor or a scientist, but what kind of doctor or scientist am I going to be? How can I have creativity with my gifts and allow them to meet the needs in this world and see the kingdom come right there?